Welcome to You Brew Kombucha. This is your guide to second fermentation, or flavoring and bottling to create carbonation. To get started, I want to explain what second fermentation actually is. If you're familiar with beer making or champagne making, it's essentially like bottle conditioning. It's when you add your kombucha tea into a bottle, add some priming sugar, in our case it'll be fruit, and then seal it up to trap that carbonation into the bottle. During second fermentation, when you add additional sugar from the fruit flavorings, you're giving the yeast more food to eat up and convert into carbon dioxide. And since you're sealing it in an airtight bottle, that carbon dioxide will get trapped into the liquid, and that's what makes it fizzy. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming you're already familiar with first fermentation and you're ready to bottle. If you're not, go ahead and watch those videos and then come back to me. But if you're ready, let's get bottling. Whenever you're ready to bottle, go ahead and take your SCOBY out of your brewing vessel. Make sure your hands are clean and transfer it into a clean container. If you have a SCOBY hotel, you can put it in that. Otherwise, any clean container will do. And don't forget to pull 1 to 2 cups of finished kombucha tea from your brewing vessel. This will help make sure that you have enough starter tea to get your next batch of kombucha going. You can put that aside for now. Before you start bottling, make sure to give your brewing vessel a good stir to kick up any yeast that might have settled down at the bottom. I like to pour my kombucha tea into a pitcher just to help make it easier for me to pour it into the bottles. You can see there's already a little bit of carbonation that's built up there. We're gonna make sure that there's even more carbonation by putting it in some airtight bottles. I like to prep my fruit ahead of time. Here I just have some pureed frozen berries and pureed frozen passion fruit juice. On average, I like to put about 1/4 of a cup to 1/3 of a cup of flavoring per bottle. I have some 16-ounce bottles and I have some 12-ounce bottles. You can just eyeball it. It doesn't need to be super exact. If you have a 16-ounce bottle, add more. If you have a 12-ounce bottle, use less. You can see I have a lot of different bottles that I'm using here. To find out more about what types of bottles work best for second fermentation, be sure to check out my video on that. You can pretty much flavor with anything you want. Here I have triple berry passion fruit. I love pretty much anything with passion fruit in it. But if you want more details on what types of fruits and herbs and tips on flavoring, be sure to check out my video on flavoring. Just be sure that whatever you flavor with, you're adding a little bit of extra sugar in there to help kickstart the yeast so they can eat up the sugar and turn it into carbon dioxide. That's really important. And if you're worried about sugar content, remember that the yeasts will be eating up a lot of that sugar. So there isn't gonna be a ton of residual sugar left in the final product that you're drinking. So go ahead and fill your bottles to the top with your kombucha tea. I find that on average, each gallon batch of kombucha typically fills about 7 to 9 bottles, depending on how many 12 and 16-ounce bottles you have. There's a lot of debate about whether or not headspace matters. Some people recommend to have more headspace or airspace in the bottle. Some recommend to have less and tell you to fill it up all the top. I haven't really found that it makes that much of a difference to me. So I will leave it up to your personal preference. That one will just have a little less. That's okay. So next, you're just gonna wanna seal up your bottles. And I like to just give the tops of each bottle a nice little wipe to make sure that it's fully dry. A lot of home brewers will recommend that you use these flip top bottles, and they're a really great place to start if you're not sure what type of bottle you should use. They do a really, really great job of making sure that your bottles stay airtight, and that helps build up the really nice carbonation that you want. Next, just go ahead and seal them up. I also like to use a rubber gripper just to make sure that the seal is super tight on any bottles that have a screw-on lid. I've actually had some caps loosen up on me during the second fermentation process as the carbonation builds up, so really making sure they're nice and tight will help prevent that from happening. So once your bottles are all nice and sealed up tightly, just let them sit at room temperature. You can just leave them on the counter, put them in a cupboard, it doesn't really matter. I find that my happy medium for perfect carbonation is around 3 to 4 days. Some brewers will say that you should burp your bottles. I personally don't do that. I don't think it's necessary to open them up to release any carbonation. But if you're really curious about that, check out my in-depth video on burping. I promise it is not as disgusting as it sounds. After around 3 days of second fermentation at room temperature, go ahead and move them to the fridge. The cold helps slow down the yeast activity significantly, so it'll kind of put a halt to the fermentation process, which is good. Once your bottles have fully cooled down, go ahead and take one out of the fridge, pop it open to see how it tastes. If you like the carbonation levels, then you're all done. If you wanted to keep carbonating, or if you want to build up more carbonation, then go ahead and take them back out, let them sit at room temperature, and leave them out for another day or so. Then pop it back into the fridge again, let it cool down, and test it again. The longer you let it sit at room temperature, the more the yeasts will eat up the sugar and create more carbon dioxide, and that's what makes it fizzy. That process comes to an almost complete stop once you refrigerate, because the yeasts and bacteria go into a state of dormancy. Remember that whatever you use to flavor your kombucha is going to greatly affect how much carbonation builds up and how fast that carbonation builds up in the bottle. So for instance, if you use freshly juiced pineapple and then you use store-bought pasteurized apple juice to flavor your kombucha, the pineapple will probably be a bit sweeter than the apple juice. So the pineapple one will probably be a bit more fizzy and effervescent than the apple juice one. So just be sure to test each of your flavors in each of your bottles along the way to figure out what works best for you. I always recommend chilling your kombucha before opening it, because cold liquids tend to trap the carbonation bubbles in the liquid better than ones that are warmer or room temperature. And that just helps minimize the likelihood of messes happening. So if you have a particularly active bottle of kombucha, even if it does make a little bit of mess when you open it, it'll be much less significant than the mess that you'd have on your hands if you'd opened it at room temperature. Once you're done with the second fermentation process, you might see a little baby scobies form at the top of your bottle. Some people like to strain it. I personally don't mind it, so I just gulp it down. It's totally edible, totally fine, but there's no real need to save it or use it because you can't use any baby scobies that have any flavoring to start a new batch of kombucha. So it's really just up to your personal preference if you want to strain it out. You might even see some settling down at the bottom, because remember, this is a live, real product, and if you're using fresh fruit juices, there might be some settling. But don't worry about that. That's just a sign that your process is going well. So there you have it. Once you're done with your second fermentation process, you'll have perfectly fizzy, chilled, delicious kombucha ready whenever you want it, and at a fraction of the cost of the store-bought bottles. At around 50 to 60 cents a bottle, it's a steal. Here I have a bottle of clementine kombucha that I've had chilling for a while now. Happy brewing! Cheers!